Yes, stand up, please.
My name is Rob Luijenveld. Thank you very much for your good explanation on the WTO. It's very good, I think. I have a question. Maybe you can explain something more about the regulatory cooperation, which is part of the TTIP, which, according to me, gives the corporations the power to develop laws and also to say to countries that certain laws and regulations that exist now are not passing the necessity test and they should be abolished.
Thank you.
Actually, you know it better than I, Rob, so if you want, you say more, because it's a very important point. Say more.
Thanks. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, well, I don't know to say much more about it. The thing is that there's a struggle going on between the governments of the EU and the US and Canada, for example, when it goes about CETA. That they say, no, there's nothing wrong. The governments, they can go on by making laws, making regulations to protect, for example, the labor or to protect the environment, etc. But in fact, some of the leaked documents from TTIP and from CETA, they state that there is a part which is called regulatory cooperation, and it gives the corporations the possibility to start to be at the table with the politicians just where the laws are being developed. So in fact it's the practice already, because if you look at the European Commission, they always go to the, now when it's important law making being considered, they go to the big companies to say, please write the new law for me. And within 2 weeks they present the law as if they invented it. So, but now it will be very much laid down in documents and it will be signed. So the companies, in fact, will have a very important effect. And also about existing laws, they can, every year a government, maybe the city government or the national government, they have to prove that every law, every regulation still is okay for the economy. And the government, the corporations can then say, okay, well, this particular law protecting this environment or the healthcare is not in our interest. It should go. It should be changed. So something like this.
Thank you.
I think it's very disturbing.
Thanks a lot, Rob.
It is, yeah. I just wanted to ask one thing, is that there's also going to be a committee formed which is going to monitor the implementation and make recommendations, and that committee is going to comprise mostly people from business. I forget the name of the committee. I know it's... I'm sorry, it is a committee, and it's basically designed to follow up on all these regulations.
Regulatory Council.
That's right, yeah.
The Regulatory Council. Thanks. I think we have the next question. You already have the mic. Please stand up. No. Go ahead.
Hi, hello, my name is Justin. And I have 2 questions regarding the labor union. What would you say will be the role of the labor union within TTIP framework? And then how do developed countries keep a balance of regulating the labor law between regulating the labor market and being welcome being beneficial for companies to build their factories, let's say in Europe or US, instead of deregulating countries that motivate factory owners to move their factories to those countries.
Thank you. Howard, can you please repeat the questions in your answer?
Do you want me to answer this one? So basically it is how the Europeans are going to deal with this labor regulatory environment in a way which doesn't deter foreign investors coming to Europe. I mean, if that's
because let's say in the US, the labor unions don't have that much of a power, per se. However, in Europe it's a different story. Yeah. So I was wondering, what is the position of the labor unions in general in the framework of TTIP?
I mean, the simple answer to that is that the aim is to weaken them. So essentially they will also be liable for prosecution if they can be accused of losing companies' profits. And that is allowed in at least half of the states in the US. Okay, and so that's one of the things that a lot of unions, so in 20 countries in Europe, the trade unions have mobilized against TTIP specifically on this issue, because it's in a way condemning the unions to obscurity, you know, like in many states in the US.
Thank you. We have a question in the back.
Hello. I'm just curious what you think about Trump and what he will bring to the global economy. It's just, I think he will damage it, but to hear your
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, what I have to say about Trump is that I think he's smarter than people give him credit for, in the sense that I think he understands what has been happening to the US economy as a result of globalization. I think he understands that. And he understands that many developing countries have found this path to achieving rapid growth at the expense of the advanced countries. I think he understands that. And I think one of the things that he wants is, whether he can achieve it or not, I don't think he can achieve it, but he wants to try and block that. I mean, just a very simple thing. He said he's going to ask his economic advisors to calculate the extent to which the currencies of many East Asian countries are undervalued, meaning too cheap, so that their exports are too cheap into the US. And if he finds out that these currencies are undervalued, he's going to put a tariff on the goods coming from those countries to the extent of the undervaluation. What he shows is that he knows it's an economic war. He knows it's a battle of exports. He understands that developing countries have gained a lot by actually fighting this economic war with lots of subsidies, with cheap labor, etc., etc. And he thinks he can stop that process. I mean, he said it most openly about Mexico. But I think that he still hasn't fully understood what is happening in the global economy. The time of the advanced countries is over. You know, and I don't think it's easy for them. I think, in a way, what he's doing is he's digging a bigger hole for the burial of the US economy, that's all. And I think the Europeans are sitting there, you know, very happy and smug, because now it's the US that's going to get the brunt of it. And I think this is where Europe is playing smarter and Trump is misunderstanding. He knows the problem, he knows the source of the problem, but the way he's dealing with it is, in my view, going to make it worse for the US.
Can I ask for a small clarification? In what sense is Europe smarter than Trump in this one?
Because I think what the Europeans are trying to do is to build as many bridges as they can with these developing countries, and actually, in a sense, ride on the coattails of many of these. So, you know, the Europeans are not making it a big secret that they want a bigger part of the Asian miracle, if you like. Okay? And they are now trying to cultivate all manner of countries. I'm just coming from Vietnam, where, you know, you see so much of a European presence now in Vietnam. You know, they want to do this, they want to do that. The European Union is giving lots of money for Vietnamese students to come and study in Holland, and so on and so forth. They know that the future is here, and rather than antagonize them, they want to see if they can participate in that process. And I think that's a smarter way to go.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Howard.
Can you stand up, please?
No. What do you think is the future of regional agreements in the context of this?
The Russian?
Not of regional agreements.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't really know about rational. Regional.
Regional.
Oh, sorry.
Regional.
That's clear. Regional agreements.
Okay, I think they're important. I mean, I think they're really very important. I think the formation of blocs is a very important thing. And I think especially from what I see, you see that bloc formation already taking place in East Asia. You know, it's not formally announced to anyone, but you see this incredible integration taking place where there are investment flows and trade flows increasing and alignment of currencies and so on. And I think for the rest of the world, something similar. So you're from Latin America, I would advise the same thing to happen. Basically, it's the only way that Latin America can stand up to what Trump wants to do. I mean, he basically wants to take Latin America back into the US backyard and to continue. I don't think this is a new policy. I think Obama actually deliberately undermined development in Latin America. I think the clearest example is what Obama and the Federal Reserve did to Brazil. You know, that's for me the clearest example. They're not going to tolerate Brazil industrializing and threatening the US in any way whatsoever. They will not allow Argentina to do that either. Because once these forces start building and you get a significant development, this is over for the United States. And I think they will do everything in their power. Now, from the Latin American point of view, I think unity will give some strength. You know, basically becoming more one bloc. How feasible that is, heaven knows. You know, I don't know the politics well enough.
Thank you. Yes. Next question. Stand up, please.
Yeah. In a way, you've answered my question partly, but I want a more.
Can you speak in the microphone?
Sorry.
Thanks.
In a way, you've answered my question partly, but I want a more clarification. Sort of, you know, how far the extent to which the developing countries or the other nations who are reciprocating this approach, like, you know, as you mentioned that Brazil, India in a way is sort of moving an agreement, you know, to move from that, these issues like trade agreements, etc. But a more sort of formal agreements are actually taking place, like, you know, GSP plus sort of things, which are moving, you know, providing sort of exemptions from this WTO rules. So how far that can be successful in a way if, you know, more developing economies or developing countries sort of move together by building such a bloc or whatsoever.
Thank you. Just before you answer the question, it might be the case because I am not an ISS student that I do not understand every question perfectly well. So please clarify the question as well.
Yeah.
I'm not the expert who can do that. Thanks for your question.
So basically he's asking the question about, so GSP, it means Generalized System of Preferences. And let's say it comes within something called special and differential treatment of developing countries. I have my reservations about this as a way of going forward because really special and differential treatment for many developing countries was a gimmick designed to keep them producing what they're producing. See, I give you differential treatment as long as you keep producing the primary commodities and the agricultural goods that I want you to produce. If you digress, so I might allow you to produce some leather products and shoes and, you know, low value added manufactures. But the day you cross that line and start producing what I am producing is the day I'm going to cut you off. So for me, developing countries that actually think they're going to develop by getting all these concessions are mistaken. You know, I think they have no other choice, really, in the final instance. It's something I keep repeating all the time, but industrialization. And industrialization, not, I don't mean producing garments and textiles. You know, this is a bygone era. I mean producing the same goods that are produced in the advanced countries. And this is where the problem is. This is what Donald Trump is addressing very explicitly. He does not want those cheap goods that compete directly with American goods and take away American jobs, you see. So he definitely is not going to allow this type of concession. But SDT and GSP, no problem for him.
Thank you. We have a question in the back.
Hi, Howard. I'm just curious if after the EU signed a TTIP with the US, is there any relevant impact with the EU trade negotiations with ASEAN? Because as I know that it has been started since 2007, and I work for ASEAN, so I just want to see your comments.
Sure, it's fundamental. It's fundamental. You know, Hillary Clinton called it the economic NATO. Did you hear that? So basically, it's a blueprint for all other trade deals. And all other trade deals will now be looked at again in terms of what is agreed between Europe and US. So all the regulatory standards, all the labor, everything is going to be based on this TTIP. And I believe whatever Trump has said up to now, in the end, he will ratify a version of TTIP. It'll just take a bit of time because he wants other elements put into these agreements. It's not that he's against those agreements, but I think then in all the discussions with ASEAN, so EU, ASEAN, US, ASEAN, I think all of them, what they want to do is to harmonize all these. After all of that is done, they will go back to the WTO and conclude Doha. Because now all the principles will be worked out, all the bases will be covered, and I think then Doha will be concluded. Because still, it has to be a global agreement to really work, otherwise, you know, there are going to be all these conflicts. Well, you know, is this agreement between EU and ASEAN going to be contradicting this one between US and ASEAN, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's only once they bring everyone together in Doha, then you will get the final agreement where, you know, everyone has to sign up to that. So I think you should expect Doha will still come up and be on the table, but your agreements will definitely go ahead, but after TTIP, and then they will be modified in view of what happens with TTIP.
Thank you.
You mentioned China as them, of course, as rising power and the next big player. So in essence, will we see that China joins the big boys club and actually start to knock out these from the rest of the advancing countries? So they just going to turn the quota over, and from the position where they were, they're just going to become a bully as well themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm from Sri Lanka, and one thing that I always say in Sri Lanka is play off the big powers against each other, but don't trust either one. And certainly don't trust China, because China also has its own interests there, and as soon as those interests are not served, they're not going to support you. I think this is something I also observed with the case of Brazil. You see, China seems to have promised Brazil a lot if Brazil provided it with the raw materials to keep its industrial machine going. But as soon as prices started to collapse and its economy started to get into trouble, I didn't see China coming in and bolstering that economy. China will not do that. China is playing its own game. You know, not to say that they're worse than anyone else, it's just that's the game that the powerful countries play.
How
Thank you.
about like a sentiment of about the sentiment of what West has done to China, let's say? Is there some sentiment, or business doesn't see any sentiment, or all feelings, or bad
Thanks.
feelings?
So comment on what the West did to China.
I would not know. The one thing is, my observation, and it's just a very cursory one, is Chinese are pragmatic. You know, the past is the past. They are only looking at the future. And the only thing I can think is a mistake that the West has made, and Europe in particular here, is pushing Russia towards China. I think the signing of this gas and oil deal between Russia and China is a big, big mistake for Europe. And I think there Hillary Clinton pushed Europe into this over the Ukraine. And Europe got suckered. You know, and I think that was a real serious mistake. It's a serious economic mistake, because now the oil and gas that they were getting from Russia, they're going to get from the US and Canada. And it's not smart to put all your eggs in that one basket, you know, especially when Donald Trump is playing all these strange games. I would have, you know, kept both things open and going. If maybe the Europeans are doing that, because Angela Merkel in particular is a very, very astute politician, and I would guess that, you know, she's not going to easily allow herself to be cornered like that.
Thank you.
But what I see is something else at the moment.
Thank you. We don't have a lot of time left, and traditionally with critical collective events we call upon those who are critical about the views of the speaker to raise their voices in the end. So if you have a question in which you basically express your disagreement with Howard's presentation, you are more than invited to speak now.
If
I'd
it's
give
one of my students, remember I'm marking your scripts in there.
You don't even need to say that. I thought I'd give it a try, but no, nothing. One question from my side, if I may. Having learned from reading books about Western advisors in third world or so-called third world countries that produce raw materials, I always find out that Western advisors advise these countries to invest in infrastructure. Can you comment on why they do so?
Well, it's a very important point, Abul Hassan, because recently a similar discussion arose with China and Sub-Saharan Africa. China gave a huge amount of aid to Sub-Saharan Africa to develop the infrastructure. And here at the ISS we had a lot of debates about that, and a lot of African students said China is different. You see, here they're developing this infrastructure which the West never developed. And actually, now with hindsight, when we look at China, what they did was they developed an infrastructure that facilitated a greater extraction of the raw materials. So they were doing the same thing the West did. You know, that a lot of the infrastructure is fundamentally geared towards that raw material extraction. And it's not really designed to improve the competitiveness of that economy in a way that these countries are going to escape out of that raw material trap. And I think that's what's important with that infrastructure. So, of course, we will see a huge wave in the coming... it would have been bigger if Hillary Clinton had become president, because they had already indicated they were going to give huge amounts of money for infrastructure development. But there would have been two elements to that. The first is it would have been American companies that actually did the infrastructure work. And secondly, it would have been to serve the interests of the advanced countries.
Thanks. So basically, development aid that is aimed at developing infrastructure is no real development aid. That's what you would say.
No, it's really the general principle that we don't give money to anything that's going to compete with us eventually, you know. And I accept that. I think it's fine. I mean, it's people moralize about it and say, oh, shame and terrible and so on. But actually, you know, let's say Sri Lanka becomes rich and powerful, and I become advisor to the Sri Lankan government, I would tell them do the same thing. You know, we have to stay up there. We don't want, you know, these Indians coming and challenging us and doing other things, or the Pakistanis or whoever. You know, I mean, we beat them at cricket, and now we have to, you know, beat them at other things as well.
Thank you. I think this concludes the content basically of our evening. Just before you leave, one big thank you for Howard for his wonderful presentation.